His model also focuses on two components: the component of task environment and the individual. The task environment, as you see right here, is a lot more developed compared with the previous one. It includes the social environment and the physical environment. The physical environment right on the right side is the text, pretty much like what Hayes has put into his model. The text that has been developed so far, and of course the composing medium. As you might have guessed by now, this composing medium was absent in the previous model, and I think the idea is that around 1996, computers were probably the use of computers was probably picking up, and scholars like Hayes and others who investigate writing uh, probably learned that, well, the medium of writing is now playing an important role. Because if you look at, for example, modern ages, right now is 2020, we use a lot of different mediums to produce texts. We use cell phones, smartphones, tablets, we use laptops, PCs, and of course paper, and I'm sure you have other media in mind that I cannot think of right now. The social environment, on the other hand, includes collaborators and the audience. The stress on collaborators is really interesting and makes the model lend itself to academic writing, especially in some fields in science and even in applied linguistics. Most often we write in collaboration with our colleagues, and even as graduate students, we sometimes are assigned some tasks that are supposed to be done in collaboration with other students. So collaborators is important because, for example, you write a paragraph and then you pass it to your colleague, and your colleague has to read it, understand it, and critique it, and perhaps add to it or delete and remove, and so on and so forth. It has a whole new kind of mechanism that was not predicted in the previous model. So that's the first stage. That's the environment which influences the individual. What about the individual? The thought processes, the cognitive processes of the individual that take place in his or her mind. On the right hand side, you have the cognitive processes, and on the other hand, on the other side, you've got motivations and affect. So let's start with this. Well, cognitive processes are three here. The three of them: text interpretations, reflections, and text production. So you've got the word text here and interpretation, as if there is already a kind of text out there for the author to write. But what kind of text is that? And this here in this box right in the corner here, you can see that it's text to read, to evaluate. That means your own text to read, to evaluate, the text that you have already produced. Number two is the source text. The source text that, especially in academic writing, that you have to read, you have to identify through searching, for example, on Google or on a database like Scopus or the Web of Science, and read them and all that, as well as the instructions. So you see, there is a lot of reading right now which has been stressed and recognized in this model, which is really good, and this is one of the strong points of Hayes' 1996 model. Then you start to reflect, that's to evaluate what you have written, or you reflect on what you have read from other sources, and then you start to produce your text, the new text, or the rest of the text that you have written, and so on. But where does the material or the ingredients for producing the text come from? Actually, they come from your working memory, and they originate actually from the long-term memory. So these two components are, as you see, are having a bigger role in the ultimate production of the process, which is the text. I think an analogy would help here. The long-term memory is pretty much like a storehouse, a warehouse, where, or if you like, a kind of cold storage where the ingredients are stored. And the working memory is like a kitchenette, a small kitchen where you cook. So what do you cook? You cook anything that you have got in your warehouse, and you cannot cook anything beyond that. Of course, you can also get some information here and there, like you can borrow ingredients from other sources, as we discussed right here. Now, in long-term memory, basically you have stored your task schemas, your topic knowledge, your audience knowledge, and linguistic knowledge, and genre knowledge. I'm not going to go through these because they would really take a long time, but one of the best resources for discussing long-term memory, and especially working memory, is Badley's work. He has published a paper in 2003, and of course more recently a lot more other papers, but the one published in 2003 actually provides a very nice historical review of working memory and the kind of studies that he and other people conducted. So Alan Badley is one of the keywords that you probably want to Google and find more about working memory. But I think I need to discuss this a little bit. The phonological memory and semantic memory are closely related to language, because when we are writing or speaking, we need to use any information that has to do with language. In addition to that, visual and spatial sketchpad is important. Of course, Pius says it doesn't have that. Alan Badley himself stresses that visual and spatial sketchpad doesn't play a very significant role, but I think in my understanding is that it plays some kind of role, especially in writing, because it reminds you where you have placed some ideas. Let's say about let's say you're writing a paper about cognitive processes in writing. Okay, so you start off by reviewing the Hayes Flower and Hayes model, and then you move to the current model, Hayes model, and you write, let's say, 10 paragraphs. Because you're keeping that information in your working memory. Here, using your visual and spatial sketchpad, you know where to find the information about Hayes. Otherwise, you will be completely lost, even though the text that you have produced, well, has been produced by yourself. Or when you're reading a paper or a book, after reading it, you probably have an idea where to find, for example, the results. Now, where to find a certain discussion about the theoretical framework of that paper. In order to identify all these pieces of information across your paper or the book, you need to rely on your visual and spatial sketchpad. So it's pretty much like a compass that navigates you through the text and shows you, it gives you an idea, a clear idea about the macro structure. And yet, I think I need to stress that, the macro structure of the passage that you are reading. So this interplay between working memory and long-term memory is also influenced and has an influence on this factor, motivation and effect.